Ambassador Schneider maybe would like to open the debate.
Well, I'll just pick up on the video a little bit and try to speak less than that, because I'd love to hear from the audience on this. I think you have challenged us with something very provocative and absolutely heartbreaking, seeing what's happened to these monuments, which are completely the world's monuments. And as many of you will remember, the United States has a kind of checkered history in the protection of antiquities, but I want to just evoke for you the words of then General Eisenhower in 1943, when he said very explicitly to his commanding officers in the U.S. military, he said, "It is the responsibility of every commanding officer to determine the whereabouts of great cultural heritage sites and objects of antiquity, as well as just simply great objects of art. And it is a responsibility of every commanding officer to determine their whereabouts and to protect them to the greatest degree possible." And of course, there was that qualification: we were in a war. And he prefaced that by saying these objects in these countries where we are now, and of course he was talking specifically about Italy, are not just local heritage, these are the world's heritage. And therefore, it is our responsibility to protect them. Now, and I think that happened to an extraordinary degree in World War II. Not everywhere. Anyone from Dresden will say we didn't do, we didn't practice that there. But an extraordinary number of monuments were protected in Italy. The United States took a big dip in this regard in the Iraq War, when Secretary Rumsfeld very deliberately ignored and rejected advice and counsel and information that he received directly from archaeologists and museum experts about the location of sites in Baghdad and, of course, of the museum as well. And he followed that up by making a joke following the invasion about how could there really be that many vases? There couldn't be that many vases, and why are these vases so important? Talking about one of the seminal objects of civilization, the Varda vase. That was a kind of a terrible moment, I think, for the United States in this regard. I'm happy to say that it's changed, and that the mistake of that is recognized, and it's recognized that you have both the situation of the need to protect World Heritage objects, but also how much damage the United States did to itself in Iraq by having the first image of our troops there being one of standing by while these great objects were looted and destroyed. Which of course made the Iraqis very skeptical of our intentions in their country. Now soldiers are trained about the importance of cultural heritage all across the U.S. military. They actually have created decks of cards with the sites in both Iraq and Afghanistan and instructions on how to behave around them. And there are higher level training courses for commanding officers conducted, for example, in Egypt by antiquities experts. So it's now something the U.S. military takes very seriously. But all that having been said, I think you have pointed out such an incredibly challenging and difficult situation, because it's not so much the question of an invading army destroying the cultural heritage as it is the president of the country, as well as now the people who he is fighting. That is a very different situation, and it just throws into relief the consequences, and we're all seeing every day in the consequences in these tragic snow-covered refugee camps. It throws into relief the consequences of the world, and of course the United States included, not having acted earlier in Syria. So now you have this catastrophe with the world's heritage as well as a human catastrophe. And I would love to hear, when everyone's finished, I'd love to hear from people in the audience, particularly Ribal al-Assad, who knows this very well, what can be done, and even as a convener, what could the ICD do, and what can be done now with this situation. You may want to talk about something else. Oh, you guys have got that there.
I'd like to emphasize that the destruction of the common cultural heritage of humanity involves the collusion of different actors. In the case of the Baghdad Museum, clearly the United States at the very highest level of responsibility. I remember being in Athens at the time we were signing the enlargement agreement for the European Union, and President Chirac just about having a heart attack because it was a very beloved museum of his that he visited regularly, and as a lover of archaeology and so on, he simply could not understand how a nation that claims to be civilized could send soldiers to protect oil heads and derricks, but absolutely ignore irreplaceable cultural artifacts from the oldest civilizations that we have on this planet. But the collusion between those who destroy and those who later then buy up the what is left over. I mean, here we saw plain destruction. We saw that in Afghanistan with the Buddhist statues. That is unforgivable and again irreplaceable. And there's nothing one can do about that sort of fanaticism short of intervening militarily and destroying them, because they are going to destroy everything in their path. Here we see a country destroying itself and its cultural heritage and the world heritage. And it's they themselves, the both sides, who are doing it. But there are other aspects where, for instance, in Egypt, after the fall of Mubarak, my concern was about the Museum of Antiquities. We remember how the French Institute, with all these irreplaceable artifacts, was burned down by the insurrectionists. The museum, which I must say, I thought under Mubarak had been kept into really pathetic conditions. The minister responsible liked to tell us that he was a great, what was that movie character? Indiana Jones, you see, and he would go to America and lecture and get $3,000 fees for it, but the museum hadn't been technically improved since the time of Napoleon. It was absolutely in appalling conditions of security and everything else. And naturally, with the wonderful Arab Spring going on Tahrir Square, meanwhile, the museum naturally was being looted. But why do such things happen? They happen because they're buyers. They're buyers and collectors from rich countries, including countries that claim to be very civilized. And I was particularly shocked by the recent sale in Great Britain of contested artifacts from the United States, from the Hopi, I think, and the Apache tribes, which were artifacts crucial for the preservation of these cultures. There are parts of the Hopi heritage where, for reasons known only to themselves, certain wooden statues supposedly were created at the beginning of the world, and male initiations cannot take place without the presence of these statues. These statues were stolen some time ago, and of course are being sold and resold by collectors, by rich collectors. But meanwhile, one part of Hopi culture is disappearing forever because, alas, they take their tradition so literally that they have stopped initiating young men into their old traditions in the absence of these idols. and the tradition is dying out. There again, they themselves, by their stubbornness and by narrow-mindedness, are contributing to it. That is true. But those who buy these stolen artifacts contribute, are equally responsible. And I think that auction houses, such as we saw in London, who simply sell and rejoice that the hullabaloo made about the situation and the claims that the United States, in this case, made for this cultural heritage, only increased the prices that they got at the auctions. So there's really a co-responsibility and a duty to either, I think naming and shaming is obviously not the answer. We really need much stricter laws about the protection of our common cultural heritage.
So thank you very much. I think if you agree, because we maybe we shift the debate, we focus the debate on the cultural heritage, is that a priority? Are these collateral damages, or where should we focus on that? If you agree, I give you the floor right now, and I welcome my co-president. At the same time, we would like to have also question or observation raised by you. So we can, if you agree, we could stay, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour on this issue, raising opinion on what should be done.
Well, I think we should consider what has already been done. There has been a huge protest when the war was starting in Iraq, when the Buddhas were going to be torn down. There has been a worldwide protest for nothing, and it continued. So damaging Timbuktu is because it's symbol of the other's culture. So if we want to act, it should be on the forefront. And we should invest much more in peacekeeping measures. We should have in every university chairs for peacekeeping, studying what are the sensitive aspects when where conflict is starting. And how do we include the cultural aspect? The humanitarian aspect is taken in account, and there are measurements, there are protection agreements. But on the cultural aspects, in conflict situations, it is not sufficiently taken in account. So peacekeeping measures on the forefront. Concerning the selling of objects, I remember there was an agreement called TRIPS, and it was under debate for decades between United Nations and all kinds of opposing powers. TRIPS would have been an agreement classifying all the objects on a worldwide level, so that selling it somewhere in the world could have been looked at. And this agreement never did happen and never was signed by the whole worldwide community. So if there is a market, there will be damaging. And it's not only in case of conflict. Look at the Maya sites in Guatemala. They were overtaken by nature, but they are damaged for taking out the pieces and for selling them. So this market is a very big connotation to the damaging of archaeological and artistic sites.
Excuse me, I I just have a question. What were the arguments?
Pick up the micro.
What were the original arguments why the signing didn't take place? What were the different arguments against it?
Well, it were details. It was an agreement like the WTO on selling, and so it was very technical. It started with a designation. How do you call a calice in French? It's called some kind of coupe.
Okay.
And to have all this translation done and agreed on it, and have this market really under worldwide protection. That did not happen.
So I would like, I don't see hands raising. I would like to add an information right now. I would like to add an information that is very important. Here in Berlin, when is the film festival in Berlin? February. This issue will be at the top priority of the international public opinion, because there will be a film made by George Clooney, The Monuments Man, that is devoted to what Cinzia Schneider just said, to the small group of American soldiers who helped to save, to rescue cultural heritage that fell in the hands of Nazi rulers in the very last weeks of the war. It's very interesting. So everybody in the world will start to focus on the issue of cultural heritage, stealing cultural heritage, trafficking, looting, trafficking illicitly. I would like to add two things, and then I give you the floor. We got international conventions because the Hague Convention declares that arts and monuments are part of what has to be preserved like humankind. Second, we got many UNESCO conventions, I won't quote, but mainly focused, even if the instruments are insufficient, on against illicit trafficking. So we have a growing awareness, but it doesn't happen today in Syria. Why that? What you said, it's very appropriate. If I may testify, I give you a testimony, a witness. As a Minister of Culture, we trained Afghani archaeologists in Rome because it was impossible for them to be trained in their country to try to build, and I gave them certificates for this archaeological training. I had the responsibility to cooperate in the reopening of the Baghdad Museum, restoration, reopening through our ministry, and our Carabinieri were very helpful in recovering many pieces that were stolen. I was in Cairo to sign an agreement as Minister of Culture with the Egyptian culture minister for the Cairo Museum. So you can imagine how sad I was when I saw the destruction images few months ago. So many things are made, but why doesn't it happen today in Syria? Because everybody says it is impossible. It's a war. The archaeological sites, as you have seen, are place of war, sites of war, like it was in Monte Cassino or many other sites during Second World War. But the world has changed. So the international public opinion is silent because people also in the international community stay silent. And just a small minority of people is mobilizing to monitoring, protecting, paying guards wherever it's possible, creating some corridors to avoid fighting in some so sensitive areas, and fighting against the illicit trafficking through international agreements with the neighbor countries. So today, I think ICD, that is such an important gathering of people from all over the world, should maybe focus also on the fact that this world-class heritage, because we are talking about a country that gave in 5,000 years of civilization something that could disappear, and that can't disappear. Pardon me, please. Do we have a microphone?
It's coming, yes. And if you could please stand and introduce yourselves when posing a question or comment would be excellent as well. You have to turn on. Could you help them then?
No. Beg your pardon, but I want to bring a little bit more color into the discussion. I think it's so nicely as you are speaking.
Could you introduce yourself?
Pardon?
Could you introduce yourself?
Mr. Busek, please introduce yourself.
My name is Erd Busek, I'm from Austria. I think, beg your pardon saying, it's nicely how you're discussing. But it is a little bit naive, and you know it, that it is naive. Because every war has some consequences. Don't forget, this nice expression of collateral damages was created by a press officer of NATO. I think it was not done by anybody else. And I think here you have some content that has to be seen. To humanize war is not possible, because every war is against a human being. I think that should be said quite straight. I think we have to go a little bit deeper. I'm familiar with what had happened some years ago in the Balkans. Damages for cultural heritage was a sign of superiority, the one about the other. Destroying the church, destroying the mosque, destroying the Konak in Sarajevo, for example, as an example of a cultural building, and so on and so on.
The bridge of Mostar.
Right, was a sign of superiority. I think here we have to go deeper. It's nice to train those who are protecting it, and maybe guards and walls and so on and so on. But the background is quite another. And I think we have to be quite carefully what is in our brains to show this superiority. And I think this is directed against culture, because for sure war is always against culture.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting debate we are raising. Please.
Thank you very much. I come from Cyprus, and Cyprus, as Syria, has a very, very long history. We are counting our history back almost 10,000 years, so Cyprus has a very, very rich cultural heritage. Unfortunately, we have also been a victim. I'm not going to go into any politics because this is not the issue of the discussions, but we have been a victim of destruction.
Closer to the microphone. No, closer.
We have been a victim of destruction of our cultural heritage since 1974. I'll just give you one example, two examples. One is recent, how we were able to get back our cultural treasures, some of them dating back to the early Christian times, 3rd century AD. And it happened in this country, unfortunately. The looters tried to sell these treasures here in Germany, in München. And after about 20 years of legal procedures, we were able to get them back. The same happened in the United States when some mosaics dating back also to the 6th century were removed from the walls of the church. They were put into suitcases, about 35 pieces of mosaics, and they were sold in the United States to an art dealer. We got the case up to the Supreme Court in the United States, and we won the case. Now, after this case in the United States, we signed an agreement with the United States government. I was ambassador at the time in Washington, and I was the one to sign the agreement on behalf of my country. It was a bilateral agreement between the United States and Cyprus, which is still valid. It is still in order, and it has been expanded not only to include Byzantine art, but also now it includes ancient and Neolithic art. This is for prohibiting the import into the United States of illegally removed treasures. If we're talking about cultural diplomacy, we're talking about respect for the other's culture. Unfortunately, in many wars, and especially in wars of invasion and occupation, as was the case in Iraq, destruction of culture is a tool of war. Destroying the culture of the enemy, is a way of, as it was said by the Austrian speaker before, is a way of eliminating the enemy, eliminating its culture. It is something that has been going on for centuries. But if we want to stop this, we have really to pay more attention to culture and not the selling of weapons and how to create more wars. Because if we don't care, then what Hitler said about the Armenians, who cares about the Armenians? We saw what happened a few years later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please. So we see that not every looting is due to a war. We see that not all the art dealers are innocent, maybe. And we see that cultural heritage destruction is part of a war. Please.
My name is Tserosuboda. I am from the Czech Republic. I give you two examples of the paradox. Prague, in my view, is the second most beautiful city in the world.
Which one?
Prague.
Prague.
Be correct to Rome and to some other cities.
Which one is
But
the first?
it depends. But Prague, but really, Prague is unique and beautiful. Why? Because the Nazis never bombed Prague. And it was the result of the Munich Agreement, of the betrayal of democracy, democratic countries, when the United Kingdom, Italy, France, and some other countries, they betrayed Czechoslovakia. Second example. In Prague is the largest and maybe the most important collection of the Jewish heritage. Because the Nazis, they created the collection of emanated race in Prague. And it's a nice and very huge collection of the Jewish property. Of course, it was stolen by the Nazis, and it is a paradox of the war. So I just gave you the two examples just to support what has been said by Mr. Busek, that war is totally unacceptable, and we have to do everything for eliminating war, because the war is against people. And this is the part of our responsibility, but the paradox of Prague is very nice, that sometimes the paradox of the war could be beneficial, paradoxically, for the heritage of the mankind. Thank you.
Please, thank you very much. You should give the microphone to the gentleman. Thank you very much.
Just make sure before you, otherwise we really should hear from the one Syrian here.
Yeah.
Only about Syria so far?
No.
Kind of.
Good day. My name is Alexander. I'm a master's student at the University of Cambridge. And interestingly, I come from a country that's always in the news, Nigeria. And I've recently heard of a lot of artifacts from Nigeria that have been sent back to West African countries and discovered to have been sort of looted to European countries. I have two questions. My questions are, one, when would the world and such a body like the ICD start working towards cultural acceptances and not just cultural diplomacy? And secondly, what is the collective effort of the European Union to return to these countries, or to not just the European Union, from these same similarly civilized countries, to return these artifacts back to these countries, since we've all admitted that these things were looted, rather than auctioning them, what collective effort is being done to return them back to their original basis so that they could keep reflecting the culture of the people? But most importantly, when do we get to cultural acceptances and no longer cultural diplomacy? Thank you.
Maybe you can answer.
Hello, my name is Bill Summers, and I've been performing here at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy over the last 3 or 4 days. I am coming from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I have something that I want to contribute. I am supposedly scheduled to do a 60-minute speech about why I am here. I have a feeling that that may not happen. And I was asked to come up here by my brother. He said, you need to be at this meeting here. So I came up, and he was correct. And I have something to offer you, and I will not expound upon it too much, but it's an issue of respect. It's an issue of respect. No one who respects you will steal from you. Not really. I know there are weapons, and people take advantage of one another. But here's what I am going to offer you. We need to build a city dedicated to art. Every continent in this city should be represented. And the people that build this city should be from the areas that are going to be represented. For instance, all of Asia, all of Europe, all of Australia, North America, South America. Imagine a city where people actually learn to respect one another, where they actually learn to exchange ideas and share their culture. You cannot respect a man if you do not respect his culture. You spoke about the Hopi. In Cuba, I am initiated into a fraternity called Anya. And you have to learn maybe 500 rhythms in a specific order to be in this fraternity. Without the drums, they can have no initiations. They cannot have priests or priestesses that further their culture. So these so-called artifacts or idols, which I would think is a derogatory term to use towards these spiritual items, we need to have more exchange. We need to build a city where we could be, where these things can be appreciated and understood.
Okay, thank you very much.
May I say on the way here that even if it is a well thought out act of war to destroy the symbols of culture, and then it's easy to say this is part of the cruelty of war. But isn't there a danger that you might be reduced to inaction, some kind of fatalism? There is nothing to be done about it. So my question is it a question? Is it either or? Is it black or white? I mean, I'm pretty much on your side that we should concentrate on trying to make awareness in the world of about the importance of culture and the symbols of culture and cultural heritage.
Thank you very much. I think we have to continue this debate, and it's interesting, but we have a voice that is very, very directly engaged on the Syrian issue.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm Ribal Al-Assad. I'm the founder and chairman of the Iman Foundation, and I also happen to be the founder and director for the Organization for Democracy and Freedom in Syria. What we have seen, Mr. President, I think it's only a little fraction of what's really going on in Syria. And it doesn't only have to do, we always come and talk about once destructions happen, but it all has to do also with education. Because as as you said just earlier, that people usually fight, an enemy, one other's enemy. Unfortunately, in Syria, we are fighting each other. People are killing each other. They are destroying each other's monuments, and it's happening on a daily basis. We also have to see the rhetoric behind it. Why we don't hear any voices when you have somebody like the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia who comes out and incite on religious hatred, or incite and asks all Muslims to burn all churches in the Middle East? Why there are no voices among any ministers or foreign ministers in Europe or the United States or any of Western or international even community who comes out and condemn those kind of rhetoric? Well, it's very normal then that we see people who take it for granted and go. We have seen for the past month, for example, the historic town of Malula, where it is the only place where they speak Aramaic in the world. It has been destroyed. It has been attacked for no reason by Al-Nusra group, who are affiliated to Al-Qaeda and others. And of course, we are also stuck between a tyrannical regime who's fighting for survival, and on the other side, we're having Salafi extremist groups who are coming also, bound on destruction of our country. It's very sad, but it's going to continue on happening unless we do something, not only once the facts are going on the ground, because now it's very difficult to come and say, well, we have to do something about it. What could we do about it? The aid is not able to even reach, the United Nations aid is not able to reach those people who have been affected by, in Syria, who are trapped under the snow or under the fighting in Syria. They were you could consider very lucky, actually, the 2 million people, over 2 million people who have been refugees, in Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, because they were able to escape with their lives. But we still have millions inside. We have 7 million internally displaced people. What about them? We cannot even get to those people. So how are we able to get and defend those monuments that are being destroyed, like the Umayyad Mosque of Aleppo, like the town of Malula, for example, all the worship places between Shias and Sunnis who have been attacking each other and destroying their worship places just based on religious, crazy, sectarian ideas. So I think this is what we have to do, and hopefully with the help of everyone in here, we'll be able to do something more positive about it, and to have the courage to stop in front of those people who incite on religious and sectarian hatred in the world. Thank you very much, everyone.
I would like to say something about the World Heritage.
See, ambassador, because you are ambassador to UNESCO. Of course, the debate by now, yes, is underlying. Maybe the balance is very difficult, but you see that nobody all over the world, nearly nobody knows that things like things we saw are occurring. And I think this is one great issue. Another great issue, so there is an awareness issue, because when in Bamiyan, Afghanistan, the world had the opportunity to know, not to act, but to know. And that was part of a sort of international debate about civilization, respect, religious freedom, and the culture protection as part of it. After the looting of the Baghdad Museum, an international community effort was put on the place to rescue that. Today, to be frank, because I'm a partisan, of course, in this debate, today nobody cares and everybody imagines that what is happening is unstoppable. But I think there is a difference between something that is not stoppable through, I don't know, peace corridors that are impossible while people are starving, dying, as refugees, and so on. And saying that nothing can be done while culture and culture heritage are so important for a future reconstruction of Syria, as you said. Because if nobody respects what are a place of religious practices and an heritage that belongs to the world, also the after the war, I would like to see, to be understood, I would like to see somebody today, maybe there is somebody, who's making something that some soldiers in Berlin 44, 45 did to save an heritage that is still today with us. And I don't see that. So I understand that I wouldn't say it is a fight between cynicism and a realistic approach and a sort of utopian approach. But that could be maybe a place where to find some limited, useful solution and contributing not to destroy something that is unique in the world. Excuse me if I try to develop the debate. Mr. Ahern.
Yes, and then
See, then she's, yes.
Okay. Just 2 points I'd like, just 2 points I'd like to make. The first one is, I think, the points that have been made about working together and trying to get people to see reason not to damage our heritage and heritage of the world. ICD, I think, can lend their name to the awareness campaign and do that. I have to say, I have the doubts. Unfortunately, I spent a lot of my life in conflict situations, dealing with conflict. There's no reason in conflict. The amount of people who are moderates or who are prepared to stand up and say moderate things are few and far between. And when conflict is raging, bitterness and enmity and animosities all prevail. So of course there will always be small groups and small amount of people present. I think we have to encourage that as best we can. But I'd just like to say on the other side of it is, like the Prague situation, we shouldn't hold up our hands and say things are impossible. I just want to give one example. A part of the conflict in Ireland emanated from a war in 1690, a battle between King James and King Billy. And the troubles really continued after that. And you were on one side or the other. You were green or you were yellow. The Dutch were drawn into it, the British were in it, of course, and a lot of other things. But in the end of the conflict, and if a conflict ever comes to an end, one of the things that we did, and when you try to get parity of esteem and bring people back to their senses and bring them back even a few hundred years, one of the things we were successfully able to do, working collectively between the governments, was to buy into trust the land where that battle took place 300 years earlier. And we're able to set up interpretive centres and commemorative centres about what it was about. And of course there were great records about the positions of who was on the battlefield. And even though there were tens of thousands of people died, and even though it cost 300 years of history, they were all quite prepared to work very hard to try to restore what they could find, chase the museums of Europe to get what they could, and bring it all back so that they would respect their cultural identity. I have to say, President, the bad news, it took 300 years. But I think there are positive things that can happen. Prague was a more recent one. But I think, can I come back to my colleague here? It is about training and educating, and I've said this before to Mark, to trying to get people across civilization who work towards conflict resolution. Because once conflict starts, you have 3/4 lost. It is about trying to deal with these issues, and it's not about Syria. There's 6 civil wars in different parts of the world at the moment. There's 20 big wars going on. It's about trying to work into the future to stop that, to get people to talk beforehand, because every hour invested beforehand is worth thousands afterwards. And I think this is what we need to do. And I'm switching, President, but I honestly believe when we talk about preserving our arts and our culture and our heritage and all of the rest, if the investment is about the investment in the future, and that lies in conflict resolution before they start in the first place.
Thank you.
Distinguished Excellencies, my name is Sarah Jibril from Nigeria. Can I have to go to front? Microphone. Maybe two issues I just want to raise quickly.
Ben, do you have the microphone?
Yes, it's not working? Well, the young man from Nigeria asked the question. The good news I have is that a few months ago, the French ambassador organized a cocktail, something, and it was to celebrate the return of the artifacts that were stolen to France. And at least that is something that somebody somewhere is beginning to respond to some conscience. However, I like maybe pound on us to remember that this sitting particularly is not addressing the conscience of the world, whether in the past or now or even for the future. And I'm going to ask an interim question again. Mr. Mark, I really want to know, with the efforts you're making, well done, congratulations, as I said, what's your relationship with the United Nations? Because I wish, Mr. Chairman, you are sitting here today, you would be if you are the president of the United Nations Council, because we kept asking questions of what exactly we are going to do. How we wish the successful president of the United Nations were to ask this question that pertain to the word human conscience. Now, please, let's all be reminded, we don't know, open up the chart of the United Nations. It all was talking that it was set up to nurture and to preserve the human conscience. It appears all the studies about Aristotle and all the old philosophers seem to have been forgotten. When we've been talking about dysfunctional civilization, my own take to this is that, very good, in my place they say that the first step of solution is to think about it and to talk about it. We are doing the talking. Now, to us, with our transformation agenda in Nigeria, and we are saying we are going back to the cradle. I will repeat this anywhere in the world, and we are on it. That the word ethics has been forgotten, left in the mud. And the development of human conscience is the implanting, inculcation of the values. And we all know, somewhere said, thou shalt not steal. I'm sure we learned it from the commandments. The Buddhists will say the same thing. The Muslim will say so. And thou shalt not kill. Isn't that, I think we knew this. How come our civilization have eroded all this knowledge, the good old time commandments of our Creator? I think RCD, you will need to be thinking more humanly. And the reason why I'm asking you to get in touch with United Nations, please remind United Nations that their job was supposed to prevent all these sickening catastrophes. And it's getting worse. And that we, the parents, call it the mothers of the world, are worried about young people that we call our future leaders. You may as well record. But please don't stop, God bless you, at this talking. We will support you, and practically, if it means I have to go and see Mr. President of the United Nations personally. And that's what we're asking. I'm so sorry that you think I'm talking for so long, but we're talking about the ages of destructions of lives. So sorry if I've taken your time, but we have to say that that's why I came here to come and tell us that we are concerned about pragmatic actions or strategies. It is possible for us to change this, because I know we are teachable, we are changeable, we are developable, and we human beings are transformable because we have the capacity of reasoning and to do changes and to change from the evil ways of destruction, destroying ourselves, to a better ways of preserving ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Because ICD is a very interesting place where teachers and students meet and talk together. There is a student asking to put a question on the floor. You told me. Two students.
I'm Zainab Daham. I'm from Iraq. I'm now PhD student in University of Huddersfield in UK. From the point of the conference that the best what we need, and we need the best. I'm going to say the kill of diplomacy is a clear message now that the contact between the countries is finished now, and there's no peace, and we are reach the conflict and the third war in the world. I'm going to ask what the main reason for the relations between the countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The lady there, the student there.
Thank you for being student. I will be student forever. I'm Tatiana Sehic. I'm from Austria.
We are all students,
yes,
anyway.
Thank you. So I work for the Lower Austrian government since 20 years, intercultural questions in education. And what I would like to put into this discussion is to remember on education on humanity. That's what UNESCO is doing with World Cultural Heritage. Is very important issue, and I think we could even do more in education, developing methods and instruments to learn about non-violent communications, to learn to cultivate diverse energies, to learn more from elementary level, to lead constructive dialogues. And we all need more prayers, more music, more dance. So maybe it could be a way to come some steps forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I just would like to say a few words and to give the UNESCO perspective here at this point. I've been carefully listening, sorry for being late. But of course, if we are talking about the preservation of cultural heritage, we have to think about the work of UNESCO. As you said rightly, UNESCO is probably, UNESCO's flagship is probably the World Heritage Program. But of course, one thing is that when we are working with the governments, because don't forget, the UNESCO, the UN, they are intergovernmental organizations. We are working with governments to protect the heritage, the world heritage, or the whatever culture heritage, intangible or tangible, of the country. And here it comes the importance of education. We have to prepare the people living in the field, on the spot, to know how to protect the heritage. And this is what UNESCO is trying to do with the governments, with in all kinds of formats of collaboration. And this is number one, education. Educating everybody before the conflict starts. And I would like here to make a point about preservation of cultural heritage in the conflict zones. And as I know, the President just recently visited UNESCO, and we are trying to do some joint programs on that matter. But I would like to share with you a very interesting experience. We had in Cambodia the World Heritage Committee meeting in the summer. And that was the place where we decided to put the World Heritage Sites of Syria on the danger list. But I have to tell you, it was a very, very difficult conversation amongst the member states. Because nowadays, with the time, in the time of communication, when you put something on the danger list, you put it there, here, this is it. This, in a way, you put the most you put this thing or a plot on the most vulnerable situation. So what I'm talking about, we can talk about this topic, I think, for hours and days, and we are all very concerned that this is a very sort of refined political and diplomatic issue as well. What to talk about, how much to talk about, where to talk about, how many information to give about, and really how to rather sometimes silently or sort of more in a low-profile way, really to try to protect cultural heritage. And of course, we were very happy to see the pictures in Mali where we, UNESCO, the Director General went there with François Hollande, and to really where we were given a possibility to try to protect cultural heritage. But in that sense, again, you have to work either with the governments or you have to work with the forces which are in the position to protect. Otherwise, it's a dream, it's a wonderful dream we are protecting. We have to find a way how to get close to that. We have to find a way whom to work with. We have to find a way, sometimes very silently, unspoken way, the people whom we can work on that. And of course, protecting the cultural heritage and protecting the world heritage with governments sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But what is good that if something is put on the World Heritage list, then it is the responsibility of the government to protect these. Of course, in a war situation, it's a difficult situation. Having said that, again, I have to tell you, there was a moment in the executive board in UNESCO when there were some important countries who wanted to exclude Syria from the executive board. And I, as the president of the General Conference, very strongly opposed it because I said, if we don't sit at the table with the countries, with the governments, either in war or not in war with each other, then we don't find a table. Where do we find a table? So we have to sit there, and we rather have to build the relationships with the powers who have the means and the possibilities to protect. It is a dream that the UN or UNESCO or whatever agency of the UN can just do things. They can't do things. They can do in collaborations with the governments, with the powers who can really do something. And I think this is really a very complicated and very diverse responsibility in diplomacy and in politics. And the major thing is really rather to start in education, to prepare the minds for that moment, which will come along. And then, of course, we are looking always for partners. We are looking always for the means and possibilities, how we can work. But, you know, who could send an expert into the field of war? We have to find a way how to work with the army, with the government. And we rather need to educate the people that they would feel responsible for the values of humanity and for the preservation of the values of humanity for the future. I just had to say that because in UNESCO we've been doing a lot of work. And of course, sometimes we can do it, sometimes we don't. What we of course do always, we always name the problem. We always talk about the issues, and this is very important. But how we deal with it, it depends on the diplomatic and political situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Bogyay. Maybe Tessa Jowell, she was Minister of Culture, not only Minister for the Olympics, for United Kingdom. Also, Olympics is part of culture. Sometimes. I think you have another mic. Yes, we can hear you, and you understand we are talking perfectly, but we are talking while the microphone
Thank
works.
you.
We are talking about, we are in a war. Is it impossible to try to consider that mosque, an archaeological site, is not just like ordinary building, also in the perspective of rebuilding a country?
Thank you very much indeed. And I very much agree with your exhortation for practical solutions, and I think that there are a number of considerations. The first is that solutions to the protection of culture and artifacts in conflict have to move beyond just vague wishes that destruction is ceased. And I think that we have to negotiate a binding international framework which is respected in conflict. I think that your account of the impact of the devastation of so many aspects of Syria's culture is what was so moving, because this is irreplaceable. And when countries lose, and particularly countries in the Middle East, where I think that the attachment to culture is very particular, or attachment to cultural icon is very particular. It is as if nationhood is being destroyed. It's the intensification of what's being played out in the streets. And I think that that's why there has to be a binding and international agreement on this, which is respected, in every way, as much as a Security Council resolution. However, this relies on culture being intrinsic, not extrinsic. And I think that that's what, in the discussions that we've had so far today, I've struggled with a bit. You can't just will other countries or governments to respect culture. It has to be more purposeful, strategic, and practical than that. And I think that if we are going to perhaps come up with some very specific conclusions about the protection of culture and cultural artifacts in conflict, then we need to address the nature of the practical steps that would be realistically achievable, that could offer that protection. And I say one thing, which is, I was Secretary of State for Culture during the Iraq invasion. And I remember very well the looting of the Baghdad Museum. I also remember that what was seen as looting, because our British Museum was very heavily involved in the restoration and the reconstruction afterwards. I remember very well how Baghdad citizens took for safekeeping many of the artifacts and returned them. And it's that kind of engagement with cultural iconography that I think gives us a cause to be optimistic. I may have spoken too long. I apologize.
Absolutely not. Thank you very much. Excuse me, our director and boss, Mark, told me that we got 3 minutes. I think it's very good that so many people remain here. The attendance was growing, so it means that we are discussing in an interesting way, in an open way. Please, Professor.
Okay, I take 2 of these 3 minutes.
Then we got the very last intervention.
If you don't take the other one. Now I go back to the issue of education. You see, destruction of artistic heritage has been happening always. Now, part of it, of course, you want to destroy whatever represents the enemy. But what goes with it is that you give less value to the art and to the culture of the enemy than to your own. So therefore, what we have to do, and this is a role of education, is we have to start educating our young people in such a way that they value as much the other cultures as our own culture. Culture is lots of things. It is literature, and usually most of the people are told that their literature is better than the literature of the others. And it is architecture, and it is religion. By the way, most of the religion says that they are the true one, and the other one's not. Now, all these things, of course, have as a consequence is that when you destroy something which corresponds to the others, you destroy something which you consider of less value. So we have to make sure that in the future we consider the culture of the others of the same value. And then I'm pretty sure there will be much less destruction.
Thank you very much. We got some problems with microphones. Everywhere in my life, also in a theatrical, in universities.
Good evening. It's Dr. Ramsey from Oxford University and Oxford Islamic Center. I have two things to say, of course. Let's look at the negative side of it as well. What we have in the war, of course, destruction of the heritage. If we want to keep it, because in the war there is no friendship. There is nothing there. Suddenly they use the nerve gas and he said, why did you do that? I said, I wanted to hold the heritage. This is what we have to think about it first. But of course, on the other hand, what I would like to suggest and recommend in here for the items in the museum which has been looted. It may not have been looted, with all respect to the countries, may not have been looted with the people. May have the government, other government, looted already and give it to somebody, 2 or 3 people, can you loot, and after that get the picture, say, he has been looted, and goes to treasury of this country, that country, and you will find it after 100 years coming back. This can happen. What we can do, perhaps the ICD can initiate something which, if there is a country coming to the war, they took over, the United Nations or somewhere, took over all the items and put it in a bank. Put in some bank like, I don't know, Swiss bank or somewhere, which be safe. Because after a few years, they come to peace and take it back. Take hold of it, and ICD can do that. It's very important if they can take over all and do it. Otherwise, it will be looted, and it is a heritage of the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have a micro?
I think whoever is going to invent a microphone that really works from the first moment on will get a Nobel Prize for peace and for art or whatever. Just very briefly, 2 comments. One very personal, and the other one a general, a provocative one maybe. Education is great, and you're all right with what you said, but it's kind of hard to educate Pablo Escobar that drugs are unhealthy. He never distributed drugs in his family, but nevertheless, he distributed them and made a lot of money with it. Somebody who is a power addict in war, you can educate whatever you want, it's not going to happen. Now, I started as a lawyer originally, then turned into acting, and therefore I probably have some utopian ideas, but here the lawyer comes through in a certain way. We made it possible in the EU that warlords were held responsible. I could never believe this when I was a child, that eventually a warlord would be held responsible and goes to prison. It's unbelievable, it's fantastic. Do we have a chance, I'm just asking you, who are much better informed than I am, do we have a chance eventually really, besides education and everything else, to hold people as far as we can go, even down to smaller military personnel, responsible? Because after all, yes, education, but risking to go to prison not only for the fact that you kill people, like Mr. Milosevic or other ones, but also for killing our heritage. I think we should bring up an issue like this. That is an important part. Sadly enough, when I studied law, one thing I learned, or we learned, is that one part of criminal law is to tell people it doesn't pay. Of course, there is no 100% resolution to this, and it will always happen, as it does with drugs. But we have to be more precise on this. And just very, very briefly, my own experience as an actor in Germany. My wife and I, we went on a couple of stage tours through Germany. We're from Austria originally. visiting about 800 cities. So they're small places, bigger places, because they have a big heritage with theaters. And the first time when on the first tour that I went many, many years ago, I realized how terrible the Second World War was. I was born in 1952, afterwards. But traveling through these cities every day, every other day, another city where we appeared in the evening on stage, at beautiful cities where I saw pictures who were so different these days, who must have been great. I'm not only talking about, of course, Dresden and places like these, but other places. I realized how terrible, besides the loss of human lives, it is the loss of architecture, the loss of a unity of a city, a village. And I think that we should stress a lot more, and also make it, again, law, and then I'm finished, even more difficult for people to sell, to use afterwards grounds of the general public that have been destroyed, to build there some architectural craziness there. But to keep these in a certain circle and let, forbid to just deal with it afterwards. Maybe I'm being utopian, but I think we should also think in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't have the right, I don't have the position to take conclusion. But I just want to give an answer to the gentleman at the last intervention. It happened, what you said. And it happened sometimes in history, but it happened in the 30s in Europe, surprisingly, when during the Spanish Civil War, before the final attack in Madrid, the Republican government of Madrid allowed that masterpieces from El Prado, Escorial, and other museums, before they were destroyed by a military attack, were taken away and brought to Geneva. Why does nobody know that? It's maybe even interesting like this event, this incredible event, because there was a positive complicity by the Franco army to let them pass through lorries, through the war areas, and arrive to Geneva. Also because one year later, or a few months later, they were back in Madrid under Franco's rule. I think that the most interesting thing, maybe, the other interesting thing is that nobody, even in Spain, acknowledged that event until 4 or 5 years ago, when the heirs of this incredible adventure were awarded by the Prime Minister. Why is that? Because it was somehow part of the partisan fight that continued for decades in Spain. So what's also the to recognize such a incredible achievement was tough, also in time of peace. So just giving you these two reflections, I just wanted to ask you to send an applause to those people who in Syria, I would say on both sides, in the museum antiquities, people working for antiquities in Damascus, and people in the opposition are trying to save cultural heritage in time of war, thinking that it is, of course, less important than human lives, but it's not so irrelevant. I think they are heroes of modern times. Thank you very much.